Please take a moment to silence your cell phone. I think I have to do that myself. Yep. If you want to tweet or Facebook as you turn off your phone, we encourage you to share that you're here celebrating poetry and the work of a fine poet. Most of the support for the visiting poets and for the international journal Tab comes from the English department. I especially want to thank our department chair, Joanna Levin, our administrative assistants, Kristen Laxo and David Krausman, and our MFA graduate assistants, Meg Boyles, Matt Goldman, and Mariam Saeed. Where are you? Raise your hands, guys. Yeah. Good. Leatherby Libraries and poets and writers continue to support our talks and readings. Today, we welcome Valerie Wallace, all the way from Chicago, where she works in communications, has been awarded grants from the city's Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events and the Illinois Arts Council, and served as an associate editor for the literary journal Rhino. Her book, House of McQueen, won the Four-Way Books Intro Prize and was published earlier this year. This marvelous collection explores the life of designer Alexander McQueen, putting us backstage and weaving in quotes from his friends and models. Publishers Weekly called House of McQueen sensual, devastating, and lithe as silk. These are some comments that Anna, who couldn't, her plane was delayed. I guess you all, did you all know that? No. Yeah.
We thought you were Anna.
No, Anna's a lot prettier than I am. I should say that. Shouldn't say that. Anna's a lot more attractive than I am. Is that better?
No.
Sorry. I'm much more attractive than Anna. How's that? I'm an old man. What can I tell you? But she wrote these things that I think are rather cool. I read in the book today, and I think this is good things to hear about it. She talks about individual poems. Small Seams opens with the statement, "Beauty is an accusation." And I'll just say that's the kind of line that stops you immediately and you have to think about it. I mean, it's like, damn, I've never heard that before, and it seems true. The poem Shears closes with the scissors whispering in McQueen's ears. The reader cannot predict how these poems will begin or end, yet the language stitches its way beautifully. Alexander McQueen was named British Designer of the Year 4 times and International Designer of the Year in 2003. McQueen designed the costumes for David Bowie's tours in 1996, 1997, and directed the music video for Bjork's song Alarm Call. He spurred the resurgence of low-rise jeans in the 1990s and was known for dramatic and controversial runway shows. He died by suicide at the age of 40 in 2010. Valerie Wallace's images are lush and surprising. Haute couture moves from the fireflies in your brain and the crickets in my brain to your stalk of young maple in the gorge of the river you brought with you, to our radiant cooling. The poem ends with a deal, a compromise, an exchange, a re-envisioning of the promise that opens the poem. Relinquish your clothes, I'll cut you mine. Please help me welcome Valerie Wallace. Oh, no, sorry. Kidding.
Thank you.
I don't know where.
There. It's so great to be here. Let me do it this way, sorry. Okay. Good evening. I'm sorry, it's really great also to see you guys holding the book. 'Cause it took me a while to make this and find someone to put it together. Council House, 1972. When I was about 3 years old, I drew a dress on the wall. What dress was it? Cinderella. When she turned, I'd never seen anything like it. Dress made for charming prince and fairy. I could manage the little sleeves, tiny waist rising, out of skirts which laughed as they traveled with her across the ballroom floor. And they had stars woven in them. I got caught wondering how to draw that color, seacoast changing to dawn. There was trouble, but I didn't care. I knew, excuse me, I knew it was the dress that saved her. All the rest was just a story. So I'm going to read these mostly in order, but not quite in order. And I'm not going to read them all.
Do you mind if we read along, Valerie, or would it bother you?
It doesn't bother me. I think it's great. Go ahead. Or don't. So this one's title is also the first line of the poem. When staggering down the runway wearing tartan over torn lace, when thin leather sheaths ripped across the chest, when hooded silk robes fallen open, when bodies a ravaged country, when inner thighs smudged with red, when only gored gray lace covers the body, when breasts exposed from an unbloused jacket, when stocks edged with a Stuart ruff enclose the neck, when obsolete colors, full way, sad, vernal, watch it, when sleeveless torn satin and cutaway shorts, when strewn with cigarette butts, when a buried history of England and Scotland, when a man yelling, "Have I offended you then?" When the body becomes everything it is given. This is Bumsters, after the trousers the Queen famously designed. The first one, or the last one I just read was about his first runway show that almost everybody hated. Okay, Bumsters. I cut a path to the sacred. Tired of suggestion, I turned her to the side, plumbed the plum, cupped her saucer, lowered the drape to her small place of want at the back. I touch where she pleases. I dropped something. I found something. Let's see. The Queen's Bop with the Interviewer. I'll just say that I read a lot about him and I watched a lot of videos and other things, and I think one of the things that attracted me to this man was that he seemed to always be fighting to be understood. And in this poem, I couldn't wait to write this poem, and I liked the bop form with the repeating line. I couldn't wait to write it after I saw an interview with him with a man who was clearly unprepared and asked McQueen about what kind of little black dress he liked, and got quite a response. So that's what this is. McQueen's Bop with the Interviewer. I've tried my best to get away from the little black dress. That uniform makes mine eyes glaze over. How can you trust counterfeit elegance? There's something ignorant in women who wear sparrows. I want people to be afraid of the women I dress. Waif who needs rescuing isn't romance. I've seen naivete. I know what can happen. Someone's life is burning from this world's brutal kiss. I am, you are, the voyeur, the mirror. I want people to be afraid of the women I dress. This is sartorial, but oh softness, oh radiance. Leather, locusts, shells, fur. The clothes I make don't acquiesce. Here teeth and nets, art of armor. I want people to be afraid of the women I dress. Okay. Let's see. Okay, and then I like this idea of a self-portrait as a bestiary. Spencer Reese did it, and I decided McQueen obviously had to have a self-portrait himself as a bestiary because he admired animals so much and loved them, but also was in awe of them. You know, birds for their engineering, but others too. So I thought of the kinds of animals that could be him, and I made this. So one of the early words in the first bit is a Greek word. It means underground. Okay, so McQueen's self-portrait as bestiary. The first is a raven. Things always close to the underworld, but not of it. Too busy stealing and yanking information from every direction. Tick my satisfaction by seconds. Know the difference between raven and crow? Histrionics. My mind jabs, tilts. I love a clean line. Look at these bones, foil, bits of fur. I'll use my own feathers if I have to. You hear me? You hear me? You hear me? You hear me? And then snake, which I'm so glad for way books put this way on the page, so it kept the long line. Snake. My ears are filled with all this sky. I make my way through your orchard, find the fallen, fermented, honor their use for my use. Every skin I leave behind a flamboyance, a chronicle, each of them a yes, yes. And there's the shorty moth. I memory the cloud my mother spun around me. Dirt birthed me. My soul thrusts in and out. With all this rustling, every night I must get hold of some brilliance. Then there's the jellyfish. The moon whispers like a sting in the sea. Feels like millions of years I've gathered and worried the thick current. Armorless, I am threaded with blades. The moon turns blue, murmurs, no heart, no heart. I am a festival of longing. And the last is a hawk. I read this at high school recently, and I came to hawk, and someone goes, hawk. I'm back. I thought that was, I expect it now for some reason. Anyway, hawk. Constellation, skimming the unknown world. My velocity a kind of screed. When from my highest perch I keen the mouse's movement, and the mouse who turns to peer up sees only sun, I am the angel and the demon when I finish into him, which is all I want, to use the bright, to make quick destruction, to dive to it. Let's see. I think I'll read this one. So when I was writing this book, I felt very inadequate to write it. And I did something that a lot of poets do, which is steal. And, but, you know, in the name of art. And I made a lot of sonnets out of lines that I took from other writers and then collaged them in this particular form. So lines and some individual words to make my own. And I'm going to read one that's made out of Edgar Allan Poe's words. And I decided it was about obsession. And McQueen often followed his literal dreams he would have and use that sort of thinking space to create what would ultimately become the shows on the runway. So I wanted this to be a sort of a dream. So it's obsession dream. It was hope that prompted my nerve to quiver. What if the world had seen me no more? Then came thronging upon my recollection, he who has never swooned is not he who finds palaces, nor strange visions. They come unbidden, colors that seemed faded and blurred, turn from faint to crimson. How strange and suspicious my labors must have appeared. Obsessed with shape, I worked upon my imagination. I struggled to perfect it. Mode and hour were all that occupied me. My soul took wild interest in trifles, passionate devotion to simple, natural objects. Perfection has the power of thus affecting us. Intervals of tranquility come only at the turn of ebb and flow. All this I saw distinctly. I love that old Victorian language too. I think that was one of the great things about this project, was that I got to study very closely writers in ways I had not done before. Let's see. Well, I really feel like reading this. I know that it got kind of read in Anna's introduction, but I'm still going to do it. So this is an acrostic, and the spine of it is not the first letter of each line, but the first word of each line. And it's something McQueen used to say, which is, at the end of the day, there are only clothes. And the impetus for this particular poem was that he, although he was attracted to and loved men, he also had a deep relationship with the women that he dressed and to women, and would joke that he was a sort of stud for hire in a weird way, because he knew women very intimately in a way. And I just wanted something that a little bit got at that. So it's a bit surreal, but I just wrote it. So here it is. Haute couture. At the first, a promise to share the fireflies in your brain with the crickets in my brain. Gift the heart-shaped apricot at my end for your bun spark unpuckered, your stalk of young maple in the gorge of the river you brought with you. Reach your hand in this fashion, the discovery of how to really bite dark cherries. Swollen border call, into me, into yourself, day in, day out. Arm is to swan, is to fumble, is to ruddle, is to winker, is to fist, is to throttle into the unforgiving current, gathering stones. They're spun from their beds and they are comprehended. I know you are only no matter how we relish this thing we do. Look at us, our radiant cooling. Relinquish your clothes. I'll cut you mine. Okay. I think I'll read this one. I've only ever read it aloud once. So one of the shows McQueen made was about had as an inspiration the awful dance marathons of the 1940s. And so the models actually staggered out, and they were they had trained as dancers for this show, and there were actual dancers in there. So they were falling, and so I thought it would be good to make the pattern on the page like this. So one can start anywhere with this poem, so I'll just start here. Gold lame, bias cut evening dress, chiffon embroidered with diamonds over jersey leggings. Yowza, yowza, yowza. Why you can't look away until the bodies buckle. Strength dissolves into tremble. When they twirl, how hungry they seem. Or is it emptied? But they cling, which is a sort of beauty. When they're done, small cuts will be discovered. Their legs are shovels to bury their body. Countdown narrows the room, raises the floor. Peach slipper, satin skirt over gray t-shirt. Every heart's pleats ironed open. A plain dress, a patched coat. Is this some country or what? Gold lame, bias cut evening dress. Chiffon embroidered with diamonds over jersey leggings. Yowza, yowza, yowza. Okay, so then I've got some poems that I think of as weavings, and I'm going to read this one, McQueen Neoprene, and it's a bit long, but that's, it's supposed to sort of be slipping, like a slippery fabric, slippery neoprene up the page. So I'm going to read it, this way, top to bottom, and then this way, left to right. I was so determined to drum into people, I forgot what it was I was doing, which was my work. Stillness now. A bit of my life wasn't given. I was to answer a job I didn't want, conflict, angst, but made like that of music or sex after. A hooligan in me, born to do myself mischief, but the last years, a conscious effort, resting, what they call sadness, though. Wasn't I my persona? No leeway to accept all my demons. I want to communicate, it is not sadness. I was a bit of a hooligan, wasn't I? So determined to drum into my life, in my persona. People wasn't giving me no leeway. I forgot what I was born to do. It was to answer myself, to accept. I was doing a job mischief. I didn't want all my demons, which was conflict, angst, but the last years have been good. My work, I've made a conscious effort. I want to communicate stillness now, like that of music or sex after resting, what they call sadness, though it is not sadness. Let's see. So I'm going to read another one that's a design, and it's a pair of wings that are that come over the shoulder like this, and there's a really great picture of them worn by Bjork singing in them at his funeral. But I love that she put on these wings and sang for McQueen. But they're quite beautiful on their own as well. Winged. The old masters got them wrong, their locations at least. Not pinned at the spine like a moth's, or the bone blade spurt. From the tiny bloom of sternum I swept over shoulders, fanned, arced. How on earth do you to walk in them? Ha! Behold balsa ribbons, planed, laced, bindings, not for flight, but descent. How will you care for me? Keep me from fire. It sings, you know, consecration, consolation, a promise to be ever sown into the sun. And I'm going to read a few from a series that's created out of the words of women who were friends with or models of or had a connection with McQueen. And these aren't lines typically from each of these women, but they're words that I then put together in my own way, and I made sonnets out of them. And so I'll read a couple of these. And the whole thing is called Bespoke. So it's McQueen speaking. This first one is made out of Naomi Campbell's words. Who was I, asking with women and concepts the whole butterfly night of the world, and why a wing in a mirror could interpret it, and the body's grief and courage. My life begins with every question I face. In each wild shape my surgery finds, when I call out my name with my touch. I know the deep privacy of the possibly lost. Am I meant to be tempted as I am? Unwrap intimacy, take its top off, go deeper to nerve and blood and calm. Everything feels wild, nothing feels young. I have found beauty, pulled back the cover, and in my time was some kind of wonder. And I'll just read the very next one. This is made out of Kate Moss's words. When I started out, fashion aspired to trends. Designers still traffic together, obviously. Now I've got lots of friends. Still I show both sides, vulgar, beautiful and vulgar. I don't see myself as what people buy. Sleeve, skirt, legs, hips, wedding, glamour, perfect fit. I never rest till the details get right. Know what I mean? Exposed defect. Nasty is gorgeous when you work it. Find your art in each element. Nothing is precious in my house. Nightmares paired with red tartan, frocks undone by marvelous vices. Perform my clothes like you're devastated. I'm not finished till you're implicated. Okay, and I'm going to read the title poem and one more. This poem I made mapped onto a poem by Basil Bunting, which I had to take a class to understand. So, but I loved it then so much, so I wanted to do it here. And it refers in the first line to the person who is credited with being the first haute couture designer, named Charles Worth. House of McQueen, blush/shocks, callous, London. Worth built his own house. Others consider cloth's ripple, want a red flare to flaunt. Finery's patterns indeed shift to threads. Line draws down interred silhouette. But while we live a while here, pattern and line gather. Quiet, that is anything but quiet. Each time dream delights, as if a small wing beats and leaves. Dance under our transient skins. And Alexander McQueen said he wanted to be remembered for creating a silhouette for the 21st century. So I've got a poem with that title. The naked sound of the body sounds like a trumpet. I announce a new world in which your madness and my madness, at the point of a needle, is my love spinning. Drop a hard landscape of bone and shadow. I am in love with birds, oh, sprinkled with a little gold leaf. What is real, I suppose, will endure. Shape that moves forwards and backwards, utter logic of form and color, something in God language, in spite of all this unfathomable language. I gave you my imaginary hand, and you gave me your imaginary hand, and we walked together in imaginary land over the earthly ground. Thank you. So now I will stand and up here until someone asks me a question. Then I'll, yeah.
What was your first encounter with McQueen? What sparked you to want to write an entire series of poems based on it?
Yeah, my first encounter was his obituary. And that was in February 2010. And I had been wanting to write a short series of persona poems about someone completely different than me. So I ended up thinking it would be him because I really was drawn to his story of coming from a hard knocks background, and not born into an elite kind of family, but yet rising as he did into the world of fashion. And when I saw his designs, I was completely taken with that. And this idea of wanting clothing, wanting his clothing and seeing fashion as a kind of armor for women. Yeah, I love that. And then I suppose within a few months it became a sort of obsession, and then there was the show at the Met, and then I got the catalog, and then it just seemed to be like 10 poems and then a few more, and then I thought, oh, could this be my first book? So
Cool.
yeah.
So do you have experience making clothes? The way you write about the process sounds like you know a little bit about it.
Thank you. I do not have any experience making clothes. My grandmother was a seamstress, and so I would sit and watch while she would hem ladies' skirts and fix their clothing. I just had to learn about it. And tailoring. I had to learn because his foundation was tailoring, so I understand that.
Is there anything that helped you into the perspective or voice of the different characters in these poems?
Well, for McQueen, I had this quote that I learned about, this quote that I read about McQueen, that was something like, even though he had this very dark ending, the arc of his life was ultimately joyful. And so I sort of had that as an underpinning for him. And yet, as we all are in our life, I thought there are these different facets to his character and persona. He had this very dark side and a very saucy side. And so I used literally different poets' voices to help me. So some of the poems are built in a way to sort of get away from my own voice and get into someone else's voice in a way that I thought would speak to that sort of understanding of him. Does that help answer?
Oh, that's awesome.
Okay. Yeah.
How extensive was your research into his life and his work?
How extensive was my research? I think I read about at least 7 books about fashion and McQueen and the history of fashion, and then I read a lot about the Jacobean uprising in Scotland to write that second poem I read. I read a lot about birds. I read about him in, thankfully I had the internet, so I could listen to him speak. I watched a lot of all the interviews I could find and read all of the ones I could find. I read a lot in The Guardian. I went to London and went to his show because when it was in the United States, I didn't know I was writing a book. And when it was in London, I knew I had to go. So I went to London, and then I got to go to Scotland as well. So to me, that's all research. And then I tried to understand tailoring more, and I tried to understand the class system in London and England, which is a little bit different than here. Yeah, so a lot. It really was a kind of all-encompassing thing for a while. It was fun. Yeah.
Well, obviously cumulative. What do you think informed your writing of his character in this work more? Like the quotes and the interviews and the snippets you saw of him and his persona, or just getting the chance to see his artwork, the fashion that he designed? Like, what do you think was the more significant contribution to the way you?
That's a great question. I don't know. Because I saw a lot of the work in the videos that, the Alexander McQueen company put out, and I looked at them very closely over and over again. And I had this really great catalog from the show that I examined, but I was also reading all the time. There were a lot of interviews with him. And I also read a lot of interviews and articles that people wrote about him. So I don't know if it was, but seeing the designs was really important too, because they're so unusual, and I wouldn't have understood, I think, the concept of detail until I had seen it. I wouldn't have understood what good tailoring means unless I had seen it. And I got to go to, just by happenstance, when I was in London, we went to Savile Row, which is where the tailors are, and I got to go in one of the shops while people were working in the basement. You know, and that's when I was like, oh, right, it's just like I just had to get down to the small emotions. And so I think experiencing some of it was really important. But I don't think I can answer it. Yeah.
Do you think you'll continue working in that same realm of fashion and poetry? Do you consider
I don't think so.
ready to move on?
Yeah, well, I'm just curious about other things, and I have thought about Isabella Blow a lot, who was his good friend, who has an awful childhood and is a fascinating person, and she died of suicide, and I think I want to do something different. Yeah, I don't know what yet. Yeah. Yes.
What made you want to write about someone who is different from you? And did you ever worry about actually doing McQueen justice, as you were going through the process and as the book was coming out?
I worried every second about doing him justice and doing him true, because I didn't know what true was exactly. Yeah, I think that's why I set out on a course of having different people sort of help me by looking at these different writers and quotes and his own words to bring in, and his friends and his family who were in the book. I didn't, because I couldn't do it by myself, and there's such great language in bespoke tailoring and in fashion and his own words. So I think that helped. I just really wanted to stay true to him, and I liked writing persona poems already, but I went to a workshop with the poet Martha Vertrace Studi, and she gave a presentation about how she decided to write about someone different than her. She's an African-American Illinois woman, and she ended up accidentally in southern Illinois picking up under a stack of books, a diary, and it was from the first governor's wife of Illinois, and she wrote poems in her voice. And anyway, that's a real tangent, but it made me think that I could do something like that. I mean, it's a real challenge, because he seems so different than me. I think there might be some very small similarities, but I wasn't aware of those when I started. Yeah, so I just tried to be thoughtful, and I told myself that anything I wrote had to be recognizable by his friends and his family. I have no idea if that is true or not. Yeah.
This kind of follows. Did you find yourself in these poems, even though they're narrated by and about someone who is so different from you?
I don't think so. I don't know. Maybe I'm sure that I mean, I did write them. Yeah. So, but I tend to think of persona poetry not as a means to express the self in other language, but as a real task to understand someone else. And so I think then you have a responsibility to use the words they would use, or use the words that will get at their emotional truth, not your own. Yeah.
Has it informed not about him writing of yours? Like the exercise of doing this and inhabiting his language?
Can you say more about that?
Like, has this project bled into your other writing and your subsequent writing? Has his use of language, I guess, maybe informed or changed yours?
I'm a lot more attentive to form than I was. I mean, it's not that I write in sonnets all the time, I don't, but even in free verse, I'm extremely conscious of how it looks on the page now, and I try to peel away what's not needed. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I was just curious. Sorry.
No, you're first.
Oh, okay.
And then,
In what ways is he so different than you are?
well, he's gay and I'm not gay. He's a man and I'm not a man. And I didn't know anything about fashion, and I'm not British. And I'm not well known. I'm not famous. And I didn't have his childhood, and basically those things. Yeah.
I think the term I use for it is wayfaring. That writing that's wayfaring in the sense
Yeah.
that you're going out from yourself and you're exploring these other
That's nice.
lives. And I think that it ends up being a rather marvelous tribute to the man.
Mhm.
Every page is full of love.
Mhm.
So I have what's going to sound like a stupid question, but I have the fiction writer's curiosity. How did he kill him? How did he commit suicide?
Well, I suppose you could look it up.
Yes, I could.
It's something I don't like to talk about, but he
I mean, how did you come to the knowledge?
well, I wanted to know. So, and it wasn't easy to find at the point when I was looking for it, but he kind of worked hard to make it happen, but ultimately he died from hanging at his house. And he wrote a short note, and his will was pretty spectacular. He left a lot of money to care for his beloved dogs and his family, and he left money to start a foundation for artists who were from no means, like he had been. Yeah, he died when he was 39, actually. He was much too young. I read that he maybe had ideas to be going in new directions with his creativity beyond fashion. And so the fact of his no longer being in existence is horrible enough, but it's also very sad that we don't have what he could have done. And, but he was overwhelmed, and he never had gotten help, from what I could tell, for whatever it was that he had, that made him feel this way, and then he was suffering as well. Yeah. Let's have at least one more question. Yeah.
For those poems where you space out the words to the point where you can either read it across or downward, I don't know the technical term, but what made you want to write like that?
Well, I like that kind of a poem. Evie Shockley does it really well, and I had tried my hand at it once before. So I liked the challenge of it. It was not easy to do it, but I just thought that I had to, because I thought of them as kind of weavings, and I thought I would, I would just be an idiot if I didn't have something like that. And then I think I got a little addicted. Did another one and then another one.
They were fun to read.
Oh, good. Thanks.
There's reference to like tartan patterns that go across. Like you ever thought about mentions of patterns in this book? Like I thought it was a reference to like tartan patterns.
Oh, yeah. I don't know that it's exactly you could lay it on tartan and get it, but it is supposed to kind of have that grid. Yeah.
And I noticed that with other forms. For instance, you putting things on the side, writing things on the
Oh,
side.
uh-huh.
Because it caused me to actually,
Oh,
turn
right,
the
right,
book
right.
instead of keeping it just up straight. So it was there
Right.
was something. I thought there was something intentional to that. So am I right?
Yeah, definitely. And it's not the size of paper that I sent the manuscript is on, where you have a lot more room. And so sometimes they had to turn it to make it fit, but like with this one, I guess. But the one with the dancers, I enjoyed reading that just now. I had a friend look at it and reject it from the manuscript, and she said, "I can't read this." But I think you can if you, just like move it. So I kept it. Yeah.
Very separate from the art discussion, but can you talk about your publication process?
Sure. It was hard. I was lousy for a long time. But I'm really happy the way that it happened looking back. So I thought about 3.5 years in, I had my book. I mean, I was basically done, and I sent it out. And sorry that this is recording now, but I got a very nice grant from the Illinois Arts Council for reading fees, because it's $20 to $25 for every manuscript you send to be read. And that adds up, really adds up. So I sent it out with my grant. I could send it out to everybody. And I was thinking sort of like, this would be great if this press would publish it. Wouldn't it be great if I won this prize? And that's not the right way to go about getting your book out. And so thankfully, what really happened was that money was spent on me learning that my book was not ready because nobody wanted it. And I took another look at it, and I rearranged it. I refined a lot of the work. And I think in that time I then went to London, and so I learned some things that I could put in the book. I did a lot of revision, and I sent it to this publisher, Four-Way Books, 3 times. And the third time they wanted it. But towards the end of the process, it started getting some attention in that it would get I'd get a letter saying, we really liked it, but we don't have room on our list. Or it would win a finalist or a second place or a third place. So when that starts happening, you know you're warm. And sometimes it just takes perseverance. And when I got the email from my editor, which said something like, "Dear Valerie, we would like to publish House of McQueen. It's been selected by the judge to win this prize. I hope this pleases you." I was like, what is this? Who is this? Who would write? It's just really great. But then I had to write other people, and the other a few other publishers said, "Oh, we were going to write to you and send you a contract," or "We were about to send this to our final judge," because it had made the final cut. And so I think when it was finally done, I knew it was done, and other people knew it was done. So that I have an even longer answer if you ever want. Okay, I think we're done. Thank you so much. Thanks so much.
Matt, is there somebody from the bookstore here to sell books?
Oh, I will sell them to you.
No one told me anything about that, but I can.
Valerie can tell you one and sign it, but you have a book.
Do you know if Anna's class has been canceled or not? People are wondering. So we're all going to Haven? O'Hara's is more their speed. I'll let them know.
What's that?
Everybody in aspects, there isn't going to be class tonight, but Richard suggests everyone goes to O'Hara's instead.
What was that last part?
Richard suggests people go to O'Hara's instead of just going home. That's me every day.
Because that's a great time to have finishing out, right?
Right? I can't wait. I'm probably gonna throw up.
Every time's a great time.
Have you ever wanted to eat finishing out at 7:30 in the morning? Where's I going?
That's like
All I can think about that is.
well, it's couple. It works. Yeah.
Well, that's your hard.
Wow, I'm so glad.
I go and be like, give me the whole email of the Oh my god.
What's that? I like the acting.
They changed the, ended up changing the name of the group. I said it. But they didn't want to put the name there because they can't.
I got a job.
Tomorrow's my Friday, so that's like, tomorrow's my Friday, so you'll know where to find me.
Yeah, exactly. And you choose not to part of it enough, and it becomes a thing. So, plus, like, it's nice because it progressing and closing in. I just have to keep my head. Oh, God.
Yeah.
I'll tell you about it. Oh, that's interesting.
No, it is in the shower.
The other thing that I really have about here is that I did end up with both so what did you do during grad school? What I was doing
Yeah.
we're all some of my best friends so he's doing like a real like skyscraper job and he said all of those
Because I don't want to spend my
well, you're managerial services. Yeah, doing what? Well,
I never did that.
I remember the first time he was doing that. Oh, you're on the 30th. As soon as you can.
I'm your admin. Are you ready? Are you ready?
I've done terribly.
I didn't try to go.
I can maybe do that.
I would love to try to stand up, but I feel
Except that has to be.
I mean, can you set up a reading and then set up a reading? I want to do that. I think we can get it too. I'll bring that on. Just post here. Yeah, right. If I answer,
Oh, yeah. Because there used to be maybe the red card was the longest last name, so I was like bar and the guy was the card I got. They charged him 15 and they were going to charge me 55.
I can't handle any of this kind of stuff.
Luckily,
I usually I'm just so dumb.
we've been doing like a stupid game where it's like a basement of nerds. No, a
No, I had a
basement
friend who was paid for private and the guy came home to her. Like, yeah, it's so I completely
It's officially Chad Newton.
Almost never. I mean,
It's like a really entertaining thing. Yeah, it's like they call it like so books are like the dirtiest kind of indie and they borrow literally everything and they like just kind of like they call big group of books the burden of books. So like this website called Colorado Big Game Trophy Book Contest. So if you see books, take a picture of them and like
thank you for making it work.
and the book underpage is having chat week, kind of like Shark Week, but chats. Yeah, they should totally. There's a lot of chats. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if they act like chats, but I've seen some. Well, chats kind of
Where did you want me to cook?
They apparently have a kitchen.
They do, I don't know, on St. Patrick's Day they make one.
That's why.
I'm a little frightened.